Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Is the sound okay?
Can hear you.
Okay. Let's just give it another minute or so before we start. See people still coming in. Good morning again. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another installment of iTuesday. Today's topic will be fault fires, the law, the common causes, and handling of liability claims. Today, I'm joined by John Smith, a director in insurance and the legal liability team at BDP Attorneys, which is based in Cape Town. John has extensive expertise in insurance and insurance litigation with a keen interest in fault fires. He will provide us with key insights into navigating the challenges associated with fault fires. Just some house rules. We'll take some questions at the end of the session. John will provide us with 15 minutes for Q&A. And if you would like to drop your questions in the chat box, you're more than welcome, and we'll go through them at the end. With that being said, I'm handing over to you, John. John, can you hear me?
Okay, Alex, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Brilliant. Alex, thank you so much. Brilliant, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Fortunately, I'm not flying solo. On my side, I've got Christo Potgieter, my partner, as well. So towards the end, we'll show faces. But at this time, we're obviously going to share our screen. Thank you so much, Alex. That is our title for today, is the most common causes of fire origin, the law, and the handling of liability claims. We're going to set the scene with a video that I want to play. So bear with me. A video is coming up, and I hope the sound is on that side is all okay.
Get in. Get in. You're right.
Obviously, devastation. That's veld fires. The video that I've shown there is a fire which occurred approximately 5 years ago outside the town of Betty's Bay, which is near Cape Town. Now, that fire was started as a result of a boat flare, which was shot off by an individual, and that started the fire. It was on a New Year's Eve. It was one of the worst fires experienced in the Overberg, I think, in over 30 years. They found the guy who shot off the flare, and he was successfully prosecuted. Okay, and then we can start with our presentation today. I'm going to share a few slides, and I'm going to share the slideshow with you at the end as well. Obviously, large parts of lands of Africa annually destroyed by veld fires. I mentioned they usually result in huge losses. And the type of losses that we see these days are extremely high. We currently involved in a matter of a veld fire. The quantum involved is 120 million rand. Yesterday, I received another instruction from another insurer, 35 million rand. Now, fortunately for the attorneys and unfortunately for the insurers, it eventuated in litigation. And it is extremely expensive litigation. I think the main reason is veld fire trials usually run over a long period. It's not only attorneys and counsel that need to be paid. You need to involve experts as well, veld fire experts, sometimes quantum experts as well, hence why it's quite expensive litigation. Now, there's been repeated warnings since 1924 by our courts to landowners to take extra care when it comes to the risks related to veld fires, and especially fire activities on a farm or any landowner. And the late Judge Corbett said the following in Simonstown versus Dewes, and I'm going to read the quote to you. Clearly, anyone who lights a fire in the open veld is under duty at common law to take all reasonable precautions to keep it under control and to ensure that it does not spread beyond the area of intended burn. Because of the inherently dangerous character of fire, the standard of care and diligence is a high one, and the person concerned must have at his disposal the skill and equipment needed to keep the fire under control. And this is usually the common test that we go to in veld fires, especially where the insured has made a controlled burn which got out of control. Now, veld fires is not new. Even in the biblical times, they clearly had issues with veld fires. If you go and read Exodus 22, verse 6, if you are burning thorn bushes and the fire gets out of control and spreads into another person's field, destroying the sheaves and uncut grain and the whole crop, the one who started the fire must pay for the lost crop. So there you go. Not something new. We move over to the law, the most common causes of fire origin, and this is now typically where you would receive a claim, and one needs to investigate as to how the fire started, and from there try and determine whether your insured is legally liable. First one that we're going to look at is lightning. Obviously, it's, as we call it, the act of God, or vis major. Obviously, your insured cannot be held liable for the origin of the fire, but we have found instances where plaintiffs try to hold the landowner or the insured liable for the spread of the fire, claiming that after the lightning started the fire, the insured had the opportunity to stop the fire and to especially the spread of the fire, and that it didn't spread beyond the boundary of the insured. We had a couple of those. One of the big culprits that we find, the next one, is campfires or cooking fires. That's a major risk, especially in the vicinity of laborers cottages on farms, especially when there's no proper cooking equipment or there's a lack of electricity. And then sometimes even the landowners doesn't give proper instructions to laborers in making of cooking fires. So that we find quite often that fires originate in that specific area. These are all reported matters relating to cooking fires and campfires. I'm not going to go into any detail. Obviously, it's some authority that you have. the question always remains, in a scenario like this, did the insured act within his, or the employee act within his course and scope of employment when the cooking fire was made? But again, that's authority. We've got an article as well, which we can forward to you at a later stage regarding these court cases. So that's just for authority for you to keep in mind when you have matters like that. This is a matter that me and Christo has been involved in many, many years ago. I was still in the insurance industry. Christo was still practicing from Bloemfontein. Here the plaintiff issued summons against the insured, and the plaintiff claimed that the fire started at the laborers' cottages. Proper investigations was done, and the forensic experts appointed by us came to the conclusion that the fire did not start in the area of the laborers' cottages. When you look towards the right of the picture, you can see a soil heap there. There's a close-up. So our experts came to the conclusion that the fire originated at this soil heap. The plaintiff's experts was of the opinion that it started at the laborers' cottages. Fortunately, our experts' evidence was accepted, and we defended this matter successfully. Next one that we find quite often is smoking. Again, laborers on a farm that smoke. Here's a matter of Viljoen versus Smith, where the defendant was found liable. One of his employees smoked during working hours, and the court came to the conclusion that the defendant was liable. Again, a major risk. Again, sometimes we find that there's no proper instructions given to laborers regarding smoking during working hours, and they don't have designated areas to smoke. Another one is debris burning. We find that also quite often on a farm when debris is burnt and it is not put out properly. A couple of days later, the wind picks up and there's a rekindled fire. Also a huge risk. Incendiary or arson, very interesting. This is the matter of McMurray versus H&L&H. What happened here is, in this matter, the plaintiff issued summons against his neighbor. His neighbor took this disciplinary action against some of his employees, and they retaliated and said he's felt a light. And then that fire spread to McMurray. And then McMurray said that you must pay me. It was foreseeable that something like this can happen. Fortunately, court came to the conclusion that's not the case. So H&L defended the action of McMurray successfully in that regard. We still find it in the Western Cape. I understand from some of the experts here, certain times of the year, there is some arson, especially in the Cape Peninsula area as well, so it remains a problem. Other one is equipment use. I actually received instruction yesterday from another insurer. It's a tractor which caused a fire. The matter of Clan Syndicate versus PT, also interesting matter in this instance. They made use of a petrol-driven chainsaw, which wasn't serviced properly, and there was some carbon built up in the exhaust system. And then one day, one of the carbon particles escaped from the exhaust system, and that caused a fire. The court came to the conclusion that the defendant was indeed legally liable. As I say, we find it quite often. I'm repeating tractors. We have quite a few matters where tractors cause fires, especially tractors not serviced properly, frequently, and only used on the farm. Then children. There's an interesting matter. This fire occurred outside Woolsley. This fire burned for 5 days. And when investigations was done, you see those little red flags. That's the area where the fire originated, according to the forensic experts. And it was children playing with matches. So the fire started there. Again, as I say, it spread over a period of 5 days, caused major damages. Cutting, welding, grinding, also a major issue. Currently have a matter in the Free State where veld fires started as a result of welding which took place. Was a windy day. There was dry grass in the area. It's difficult to defend matters like this. It's foreseeable. One is supposed not to weld in dry areas and at least to have some firefighting equipment available to stop the spread of any fire that you might cause. Spontaneous heating, not so often. We found 1 or 2 of those. Lucerne is stacked lucerne sometimes can spontaneous heat and cause a fire, but as I say, we haven't. I think we had 1 of those over all the years. Fireworks. That's the example of the video. They showed you the flares, fireworks, major issue, especially here, as I say, in the Western Cape, with the boat flares that they shoot off at New Year's Eve sometimes. And then our big friends at Eskom. Now, here the shoe is usually on the other foot. Obviously, the veld fire matters that we attend to are predominantly defendant work. So in other words, we defend an insured on which farm a fire originated or spread over. Here we usually act for the insurer as a plaintiff against Eskom. So it is a major issue these days. The maintenance of Eskom is, according to the experts, not what it used to be. So the Eskom power lines are creating major headaches across the country. Also a matter that me and Christo has been involved in. This happened outside Hermanus. There you see the burn scar, and that is the insured's property prior to the fire. It's a beautiful property, and that is what remained after the fire. Everything was destroyed. Investigations was done by the forensic investigators, and the evidence showed that this pole here on the left-hand side, we had evidence that that pole was planted in quite soggy ground, and it started to lean over, and it resulted in a break in the line. You can see the line is fixed there. And when the investigations was done, you see these yellow ropes on the ground here. They found the piece of metal, the arc that is created when a power line breaks. And here, Christo entered into negotiations with Eskom, and even before summons was issued, the matter was settled, and it was a good settlement. It was quite a few million rand. In the old days, the Eskom, to litigate against Eskom was a bit easier. These days, we find it that they are a bit tougher, so it's not that easy anymore. So they litigate quite vigorously. Another big headache, controlled burning getting out of control. This is typical when an insured would make a controlled burn of a certain area and it gets out of control. Again, I refer you to the first matter of Judge Corbett of Simonstown versus Deuce, Van der Eken. That's an example where the defendant was held liable due to the fact that they didn't control the fire properly and it got out of control. Smoldering material. This we find especially in scenarios where a fire is brought under control on the insured's property. The fire could have either started on the insured's property, brought under control on the insured's property, or even in instances where a fire originated on the insured's neighbor's property, spread to the insured's property, brought under control on the insured's property. Then there's many times there's smoldering material. Tree stumps, roots, believe it or not, dry cow dung is a major risk. The experts call it damping down. And again, as I say, we've had quite a few matters where the insured is held liable for not detecting and not putting watchmen in the specific area where the fire was brought under control. Okay, if we now move over to the I2 policy wording and the insurance cover and the handling of claims, here I quote from the I2 policy wording on page 25, where you provide cover for spread of fire. You are obviously familiar with this wording. I think the important part I've underlined there, you obviously referring to the insured, have complied with all requirements contained in the National Veld and Forest Fire Act as amended. Now, that's the question that we get very often. What are these requirements? In other words, when I receive a claim, how do I need to interpret this? What are the elements that I need to make sure that I need to ask the insured that he or she complied with? And there are mainly 5 of those, 5 requirements. The first one is Chapter 4, and that's fire breaks. Chapter 4 of the Act stipulates that every owner whose land a veld fire may start or burn or spread must prepare and maintain a fire break on his or her side of the boundary between his own land and any adjoining land. Now, this is a bit of a headache sometimes, especially here in the Western Cape. It's especially with the mountainous areas, it's nearly impossible, humanly impossible, sometimes to make a fire break on the boundary. Many a time, fire protection associations, and we'll get to fire protection associations in a few slides, they may make rules regarding fire breaks. The big problem with a fire break is, and I haven't quoted it here, in terms of the Act, it must be long and wide enough to stop a fire from spreading. Now, the experts tells us, and we've experienced that as well, a heading fire, especially with a strong wind behind it, a fire break would make no difference. It simply jumps. It jumps a fire break. We've had recorded spotting, as they call it, in one of the veld fire matters that we've been involved in of over 800 meters. So we find it that with the majority of insurers that we work for, that they are quite sympathetic about this, in the sense that if the insured didn't have a fire break, they look at the circumstances. The question remains, was it material? In other words, did the absence of the fire break contribute towards the spread, yes or no? And that's usually a question which needs to be answered by an expert, depending on the circumstances. The next requirement is that the insured must have equipment, protective clothing, and trained personnel. Now, there are no prescribed requirements. There's no regulations regarding that specifically. Again, it depends. It depends on the type of farm that you are farming on. It depends on the area. Obviously, there will be a vast difference between somebody that farms in the Bushmanland in the Northern Cape versus somebody, say, for instance, in the Western Cape. But we find it that the majority of insureds and farmers do have the necessary equipment. Protective clothing, again, it depends, and trained personnel. Here and there, you do have very active fire protection associations that provide training, but our experience, again, in that regard, the majority of farm laborers are not officially trained, but they do have a lot of experience, because the majority of, especially in the Western Cape, Free State, and the Northern Province, there's quite a lot of veld fires every year. So they do have a lot of experience. Then the third requirement is every owner on whose land a veld fire may start or burn must ensure that in his or her absence, responsible persons are present on or near his land. In the event of a fire, will extinguish the fire or insist in doing so. That's a question that we pose from time to time if the insured is absent in the start of when the fire starts. The fourth requirement, any owner who's reason to believe that the fire on his or her land, any adjoining land may endanger life, property or environment must immediately take all reasonable steps to notify the fire protection officer or any member of the executive committee of the Fire Protection Association and the owners of adjoining land. So I would say it's typically now a fire already started. So a fire was identified. This is what the insured must do. But again, we see this is done. We've never found that the matters at least that we've involved in that the insured didn't comply with this. And then the Act places a positive responsibility, requirement 5, on the insured. He must do everything in his or her power to stop the spread of the fire. Positive responsibility. Again, there, we haven't seen in any of the matters that we've involved in that the insured is lackadaisical and that didn't want to get involved in the fighting of the fire. So they are quite active in this regard. So those are the 5 main requirements, and one would expect your assessor or whoever your investigator is that you appoint, that they look at those 5 requirements in order for you to consider the claim, and especially whether the requirements were met in terms of your policy wording. As I've mentioned, one of the important associations, which is obviously, and it's also a creation in terms of the law, is what we call the Fire Protection Association. And that's one of the questions that needs to be investigated as well. The question is your insured a member of such an association? Now, there are specific benefits when you belong to an FPA. Obviously, it's collaboration and planning. Its resources are shared, leading to the availability of more equipment. We find that quite often that the Fire Protection Association will buy firefighting equipment, the more expensive stuff, so they would share the cost thereof, but then obviously it's available to all the members of the FPA. Collective management of field fires using local knowledge, I think it speaks for itself. And then very important, effective management of field fires requires organizational structure, strategy, plans, information, networks, skills, and equipment that can seldom be provided adequately by one landowner alone. Again, I think that's the most important. And especially in the Western Cape, there are the fire protection associations that we deal with here, they are highly, highly organized. All of them appoint full-time fire protection officers, and they run a very, very tight ship. And obviously it works. And then improved communication amongst members about, for example, fire hazard conditions and risk management. The majority of them have WhatsApp groups, so they would warn each other, especially when it's a high danger rating or fire danger rating for a specific day. So it's communication. So that's what it's all about. And then very important, if an insured is a member of an FPA, there will be no presumption of negligence. And that is Section 34 of the National Flood and Forest Fire Act. Now, this is a summary of Section 34, and I'm going to read this to you. Section 34 stipulates that if a person is being held liable in a civil claim for damages due to the negligence as a result of a field fire which the defendant, let's call it your insured, caused or started on or spread from land owned by the defendant, a presumption of negligence against him or her will apply if he or she is not a member of the FPA in the area. This means that there will be a reverse onus of proof in court, in the sense that the person who's being held liable, let's say or insured, will carry the onus to prove his innocence. I repeat, this reverse onus will only apply if the defendant is not a member of the FPA. Now, obviously, nobody can be forced to become a member of the FPA. Obviously, everybody has the freedom of association in terms of the Bill of Rights. But this is one example where one can really obviously ask the insured to become a member. I think there are a couple of policies in the market which has this as a requirement. A requirement is that you must be a member of the FPA. If not, it's a condition in the policy that was breached. So that is something that one can consider. Again, I always tell when I do presentations to farmers, if that is the only reason to belong to an FPA, then join the FPA. Christo has done a memo the other day, and I think it was forwarded to the majority of you. Those of you who didn't receive it, we will forward it again, or Alex, you can just make sure it gets to them as well. On 18 March of last year, the President assented to the National Veld and Forest Fire Amendment Act. Now, the Act aims to amend the National Veld and Forest Fire Act of '98, and this will come into operation on a date fixed by the President by proclamation in the Government Gazette. Important, a date has not been fixed as yet. But there is a bit of confusion in the market. I've seen it with other insurers. They are under the impression that the Amendment Act is already in force. It is not. It's very important. It is not in force as yet, so we still apply, let's call it the old Act. Now, there's just two elements that we want to highlight in this regard. The Act is renamed. They want to call it the National Veld Fire Act. And then the most important amendment is that there is a new definition of veld fire. And the new definition reads as follows. A veld fire means any vegetation fire that occurs outside the city, town, its adjoining industrial or residential area, including any vegetation along any rural urban fringe of a city, town, and its adjoining industrial or residential area boundaries. Now, the catalyst for this amendment comes from the judgment in the case of Gouda Boerdery versus Transnet. Now, in this case, a fire started in a railway reserve. It was owned and controlled by Transnet, and it spread to the appellant's property. Now, the court first considered the provisions of Section 34, says that presumption of negligence, and whether, on the facts of the case, the effect of the section was to shift the burden of proving the absence of negligence to the respondent, that's now to Transnet. Very important, the court decided that the railway reserve did not constitute a veld and that the appellant could not rely on Section 34. Thus, the onus of proving all the elements of the claim for the damages remained with the appellant. Now, the reasoning of the court coming to that conclusion is the following quote. Where the land in question takes the form of a strip 20 meters wide, it would mean that whatever the use to which the land may be put, the owner would be obliged to turn nearly the entire strip into a fire break. Such a result could never have been what was intended. The result would be that virtually every stretch of railway reserve, and for that matter, road reserve, in the rural areas would have to be turned into a fire break. And then we make the statement, it therefore appears as if the legislator has not properly considered these cautionary words. Because if we go back to the definition of veld fire, if you apply the definition of veld fire under the new Act, then a railroad reserve will be regarded as veld, which will mean that Transnet will be hit with the presumption of negligence. And furthermore, the second important amendment is Section 4.8, provides that the owner in respect of state land, a state-owned enterprise, a public entity, or an organ of state must, within a year after the commencement of the National Veld and Forest Fire Amendment Act, join a registered FPA in the area in which the land is situated. Again, a positive responsibility for, let's call it a state-owned entity, must become a member. No choice, they have to. That will include municipalities, etc. The effect of this is that the entities like Transnet, Eskom, Sanral would now be obliged to join a registered FPA in the area in which their land is situated. Failure to join a FPA would mean that such entities would be struck by the presumption of negligence in terms of Section 34. Okay, then we go over to the investigation of claims. Now, time is of the essence. So when you receive a claim for a spread of fire, one unfortunately needs to jump on that ASAP. The reason being is that one needs to appoint assessors and especially forensic experts to get to the scene as soon as possible. Reason being is that they look at micro indicators which may disappear within a couple of weeks' time. Hence why we always say, jump on that as soon as possible. Assessors, it depends on who you appoint. Assessors is also necessary to appoint, especially if they want to look at the merits. Obviously, your forensic fire investigator look only at the forensic issues. Now, unfortunately, we find these days that there are certain, I'm not going to mention names, individuals and companies out there that regard themselves as forensic fire experts. Unfortunately, the real forensic fire experts are few and far between. There's not a lot that we, at least, really regard as forensic fire investigators, forensic experts, I want to call. There's a lot of forensic experts that think they are, but they are not. There's a vast difference between investigating the merits and appointing a forensic expert to investigate the forensic aspects of a fire. If you need names, we will provide you with those names of the forensic experts, which we regard as the real experts in the field. And then also important, depending on how we see the merits, quantum experts need to be appointed, especially in the Western Cape. Many a time, vineyards are destroyed by a fire. If one comes to the conclusion that the insurer is legally liable, we want to prevent unnecessary litigation, and then you must appoint the correct quantum experts to investigate the quantum of the plaintiffs. Yeah, and I think this is my last slide. This is the challenge of a fire investigator. You are looking for something that is usually quite small, that is probably quite black, and is in the middle of a whole lot of other black stuff. And that's the challenge that they face. Hence why I say one needs to appoint the correct forensic experts. Alex, thank you. We can go over to questions.
Thank you so much, Christo, for the insight and interesting feedback. We've got 2 questions. So the first one is, where a fire has started several farms away, and then as a result of strong winds, crosses farms and finally onto the client's farm, threatening the house, cars, and the lives of the people at the house. Can a client backburn around the house to save the house and the lives? And what would happen if the backburn fire, having saved the house, spreads onto other neighboring farms, even if the main fire would have gone the same route or had the same effects?
Okay, I'm handing over to Chris.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure I understand the question correctly, but one must remember, when you're faced with a fire, it's normally an emergency situation. So the court will never criticize somebody if he makes an error of judgment in an emergency situation. If your only way of trying to fight a fire is to put in a backburn, and that backburn gets out of control, the court will not criticize you for doing that. In your instance, there's another thing that you mentioned, is that the fact that the fire would have in any event spread. So that means that the fact that you put in a backburn which caused damage, but would have made no difference, the main fire would have in any event spread, it means that the new fire or the backburn that was put in did not sever the causal connection between the original fire and the fire that eventually caused the damage. I don't know whether that answers the question.
I think it does. I think it does. And then the next question would be, when it comes to fire breaks, you can only burn on a certain day. Sometimes you get situations where you haven't been able to complete all necessary breaks due to weather conditions like ongoing wind. What would happen if a fire spreads and you can show that you did your burns when you could even... What would happen if fire spreads and you can show that there could have been, the breaks were not completed?
Well, first things first, one must remember that burning is not the only way of making a fire break. So the fact that you haven't got time, or the weather doesn't allow you to make a fire break through burning, doesn't mean that you cannot make a fire break. There's other ways of making fire breaks. So burning is the most often and common way of making a fire break, but it's unfortunately also the most dangerous way to make a fire break. So I don't think that will be an excuse. Again, back to the fact that one must be very careful. The absence or presence of a fire break is not the alpha and omega. One must always see and investigate whether the absence or presence of fire break would have prevented the spread of the fire. And that's very, very important. Sometimes very often fire breaks in high wind conditions cannot prevent the spread of a fire. So the fire just jumped the fire break. So even if you do have a fire break, it will not prevent a fire from spreading. A fire break is only effective against what we call a flanking fire or a backburn. A fire break prevents a backburn and a flanking fire. And the other thing is, if a fire do start very near a fire break, and it hasn't got time to pick up speed before it reaches the fire break, then the fire break can be effective. But the further the fire starts from the fire break, the least the chances are of the fire break stopping the fire.
Okay.
And Alex, if I can perhaps come in here as well to add on to Chris too. One of the forensic experts that we use is a guy by the name of Dr. Jock Dankwitz. Now, he's very critical about fire breaks, and especially by way of making a fire break by way of burning. Again, he says that his experience is that many a time that burning, which is a controlled burning, and I can refer to that Van der Eken case, then the fire gets out of control. So we find it in the Western Cape that the majority of the landowners here do not make use of the, let's call it the fire or the burning method to make a fire break. They do cutting by way of bush cutters or mulchers. That's the way that they make fire breaks here. But I think to get back to the question, one must be extremely careful if you want to make use of burning to create fire breaks. It's going to be the same principle, that you must have a very good excuse why it's not your fault that the fire escaped beyond the area of the intended burn.
Okay. And then next question, do you believe that advanced predictive modeling to real-time satellite monitoring and drone technology, as well as innovations, could greatly enhance capabilities in early detection, rapid response, and proactive management of wildfire events? Could we, in essence, fight fire with technology? And how would it apply to city risks?
A very good question. Perhaps I'm not the guy to ask a very, very good question. Obviously, what we have in terms of the Act is what they call the Fire Danger Index. Unfortunately, it's not been promulgated as yet, but that's one of the resources that a landowner these days, I think, is supposed to consult before he decides to make any fire of whatever nature. The South African Weather Service issues a fire danger index, I think every afternoon around about 2 o'clock for the whole country. So that's the only way, and that's the only technology, you can put it like that, that is referred to in the Act. Predictive models, most probably, if needs be, and we need to set up a follow-up presentation, we can get the forensic guys involved and get their ideas in that regard as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Alex, I can just mention that Chapter 3 of the Act deals with firefighting, fire danger rating, and it's sections 9 to 11. And it has still, since 1998, not been promulgated. So it is there, but it hasn't been promulgated.
Thanks, Christo. And then the next question, spotting fires can travel kilometers. In the Knysna fires of 2017, spot fires were started by ambers that traveled 3 km over indigenous forests. Okay, that's not a question. Would you be able to give us a figure in terms of the losses sustained as well as the cost incurred, and how steep are they? Just a general estimation of the losses that we've seen in the past, let's say 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, Alex, we were involved in the Knysna fires initially for, I won't mention names, but 2 quite big insurers. I can't remember the figures, but it was hundreds and hundreds of millions in the Knysna fires. It was big numbers. I have the numbers still somewhere, but that was a major fire. Very interesting. There is litigation, ongoing litigation on the Knysna fires. I know the attorney quite well. He issued summons against the district municipality. That fire originated in an area which was smoldering for many weeks. And that smoldering was caused by a lightning strike. And then on that specific day, we had a serious cold front that came through in the Western Cape. Schools were closed, and then it spread along the coast, and then that smoldering area rekindled, and it obviously caused that devastation. But again, as I say, I can't remember, but it's hundreds of millions.
Okay, and then just in comparison, how does a smallholder or a lifestyle farmer fit into the bigger scheme of veld fires?
Yeah, I think it's very much the same, especially the new definition of veld fire makes it very clear. So in other words, if you live outside let's call it the perimeter of a town or a city, you will be hit by the Act. And I think even under the old Act as well. So whether you've got a small holding or whether you've got a big farm, the principles will remain the same, definitely.
And then, in your experience, have you noticed whether or not there has been a particular take in the vulnerability, weaknesses of a home or structures of wildfire hazards, such as flying embers or flame impact, into account when it comes to liability claims handling or wildfire damage?
I must just make 100%. Can you repeat the question for me? I just want to understand. So you say it's flying embers. You can just repeat the question if you don't mind.
So based off your experience,
yeah,
would you say that there's been a particular look into the vulnerability of homes, structures to wildlife hazards, such as like your burning embers and flame impact into account when determining liability or just having a claims aspect to it.
There's been I've done a presentation some time ago to landowners in the Cape Peninsula, and there's quite nice research which was done in America, and one of the forensic experts that we use is from Pretoria. His son has got a doctorate from the University of Maryland. And they've done quite a bit of research regarding structures, flying ambers, and the propensity of a specific structure to burn down as a result of flying ambers. And simple things like leaf gathering in gutters, etc. So in America, for instance, people that live on the urban edge, they need to clean their gutters every year to make 100% sure there's no burning or flammable material. So again, something that the expert can help us with. And again, as I say, we perhaps need to look at a follow-up presentation where we get the experts involved.
Yeah, then obviously, Alex, thatch roofs are a huge danger.
Yeah.
Because thatch roofs are known for getting a light, and it can cause spread of fires. So that was a few years ago. We had the St. Francis fires, and there was thatch roofs that caught a light, and it spread from the one residence to the other.
Yeah. And then I'm just trying to modify this question, but could a fault fire be both an act of God within some elements of human participation?
What it can't be, I think, a combination, but once there's, for example, lighting, and the fire starts due to lighting, there's obviously an obligation on the landowner to take steps to prevent the spreading of the fire beyond his farm boundaries. There's quite an old SCA case that still applies today. It's for the Lombard's Municipal Forestry, in which the SCA, or the Appellate Division as it then was, said that if a fire spread onto your property, or even if it originates on your property without any fault on your side, you still have to take steps to prevent the fire from spreading to your neighboring farms, to neighboring properties. So in that sense, there might be a combination. Fire starts due to lightning, and then you cannot obviously just sit back and watch this fire spreading. You must take active steps to prevent the fire from spreading. And in that sense, there might be a combination between an act of God and a human inactivity.
Okay. And then who needs to join the FPA? And are there any specific requirements for any person joining? And what would be the association fee for each member?
Obviously, it's voluntary, as I've mentioned. But if you're a landowner, let's just start at the beginning. The majority of the country now is covered by fire protection associations. The Act specifically makes provision therefore. It's my experience that when they started forming FPAs, it's usually the farmers' associations for a specific area. So anybody can join if you want to. And Section 4.7 of the Act reads as follows: where Fire Protection Association has been registered in an area, all or part of which is controlled by a municipality, and that municipality has a service, in which there is a designated service, the municipality or designated service must become a member. And then obviously we've referred to the state land as well, but it remains a voluntary association.
Except for those two institutions, they are obliged to be a member.
Yes, that's it. So landowners, cost-wise, it depends. I've seen different cost structures. It depends, but it's not a major expense. We're talking relatively small money. It's a couple of £1,000 per annum. But again, it depends on the area. But yeah, as I say, FPAs, especially we find it that some insurers start do a bit of marketing as well under the FPAs, because obviously active FPA, well-run FPA helps with what management of veld fires. The better you manage an area, the less likely that the veld fire will start.
Okay, I think we'll have just two more questions before our time is up. As climate change brings on long and dry summers, which could possibly lead to fire, what, in your opinion, should a policy maker keep in mind around all to do to combat the effects of climate change?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. With global warming, it remains a problem. It remains a problem if we look at the Western Cape. Our summers are longer, our summers are drier. So again, perhaps one for the experts in that regard, but that is definitely so. Our experience is, and when you talk to the local experts as well, we had a vast increase in veld fires in the Western Cape over the last decade. Free State as well, we've seen it there as well. So that veld fires these days are a major risk countrywide. That is definitely so.
Yeah, and maybe be stricter regarding the compliance with the requirements of the Act, and also regarding the membership of an FPA in the area. By, for example, you can consider something like giving a discharge on premium if an insured is a member of the FPA in the area. That's just something one can consider.
And then I think the last one, but which, in case before asking the question, there are various factors in considering how much cover an insured would need. But in your experience and expertise, what would you deem to be a sufficient sum insured under a spirit of fire liability policy? Just maybe a general sense, notwithstanding the fact that, again, there's a lot of underwriting factors that we need to consider.
Yeah. I always say when it gets to liability as much as possible, it's a difficult question. The majority of insurers that we work for have cover between 20 and 25 million. On let's call it the underlying policy. Again, it depends. In other words, I always say you must look at your neighbors. So in other words, what is the value of your neighbor's property, in the sense that if I farm in the Northwestern Cape, my next door neighbor only has veld, versus I farm outside Stellenbosch, next to me is Lanzarote. If Lanzarote burns down, that's hundreds of millions, versus I farm outside Uppington, there's only veld. So again, I say it depends. Your risk is what the value is of your, let's call it, immediate neighbors. But again, as I say, I'm no underwriting expert. Again, I'm repeating, my expertise. Yeah. I think the policies makes provision for around about 20-25 million.
And then,
which is many a time not sufficient.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd said there are two more questions, but there's actually two that have popped up that could be quite interesting. Your thoughts on the Los Angeles wildfires? What input would you have on those fires? And the last question would also just be, can an insured contractually limit its potential liability with its neighbors?
First of all, I think we know too little about the Los Angeles fires. I think there's been a lot reported that obviously it's absolute devastation. There's a lot of, I think the politicians got involved, and there were talks about there wasn't sufficient water for firefighting. So I know too little in that regard.
Regarding the to understand you correctly, whether you can sort of protect yourself against a claim by your neighbor. Just repeat that second part of the question, Alex, please.
So would an insured be able to contractually limit its potential liability to neighbors?
Well, I can't see how that's going to work. A classic example where that can happen, but that's not the Veldfire context, is a classic disclaimer that if you've got a shop owner can put up a disclaimer in his shop to the effect that he's not liable should anybody slip and fall in his shop. That can work. But how it can apply to a Veldfire situation, I can't see, because you can I'm thinking aloud now, maybe get to an agreement with your neighbor that if there's a fire that started on your property and spreads to his property, he won't hold you liable for that. You can do that. Whether it's going to be effective if a fire does start due to your negligence, I don't think so. I haven't heard of it. I can't think of a situation where that can happen. John, I don't know whether you can think of something.
I've come across it a couple of years ago where I think it was the Overberg Fire Protection Association, where if they make a controlled burn, they want their landowners to sign some type of a disclaimer.
Or indemnity.
Or indemnity, yeah. Sign that. I've seen that, but that is on specific areas when they make a controlled burn. But again, it's you don't know how far it's going to spread. That's the problem. So if a controlled burn gets out of control, where do you go? How far do you go? In the Western Cape, fire that burns for 5 days is for several kilometers. So remember, at the end of the day, if you want to make sure you protect yourself with indemnity like that, you must make sure that whoever might be a potential plaintiff against you signs that document. So it is a bit impractical, I think, if you want to try and achieve something like that.
Okay. No, thank you so much, John and Christo. I think we're going to end it there. If there's any other questions, you're more than welcome to send us an email or leave your question in the chat, and we should get back to you. But yeah, any closing remarks, Christo, John?
No, I think from our side, just thank you for the opportunity. As I say, there's if we need to do a follow-up with perhaps a bit more on the forensic side, I'm more than willing to get a forensic expert to do a presentation on the forensic aspects and how they investigate. I can organize that for you.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone that has joined us today. See you soon, and hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.